So we're in our series, All the Feels. How many of you have enjoyed this series so far? I've enjoyed it. It's been a good time. But we've been talking about some different things. And today I want to just touch on a little bit of the emotions side of all the feels. How many of you know that when you're in relationships, whether it be dating or whether it be friendship, there are some emotions that can come into play? Anybody? Some of you? Okay. Some of you are like, I don't know. Okay. Yeah, right. So we're going to turn really quickly and see what the Bible says about some of these things. In Proverbs 4, verse 23. We're going to start in Proverbs 4, verse 23. And at this time, I want to welcome all of our correctional facilities, the Multi-County Juvenile Detention Center, all of our YouTube watchers. Thanks so much for tuning in with us. We're glad to be with family tonight. And picking up in Proverbs chapter 4, verse 23, it says this. It says, above all, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it. Above all, everybody say above all. Above all, guard your heart, because everything that you do flows from it. I think it's vitally important that you and I, as Jesus followers, if you're a Jesus follower in this place, that it's vitally important that we have an understanding that we are called to protect our heart. That we have an opportunity and a command to go ahead and guard our heart. And sometimes that could look like guarding your heart against things that can come like bad relationships or things like that. But how many of you know that sometimes that can be just making sure that you don't allow things in your heart that cause your heart to get hard? That your heart remains soft soil, that it remains pliable for God, and that it remains open for all that God has for you. And how many of you know that if you allow certain attitudes and certain things to infiltrate your heart, that they'll cause you to not experience God's best? You won't experience God's best in your life, in your relationships, in different areas. You won't experience God's best. My heart for you is I want to see you experience God's best. So I've found that, man, it is so vitally important that we keep our heart guarded. And we keep the soil of our heart soft so that God is able to do in our lives what he wants to do. How many of you, that's your heart desire, is you want to see God do everything he wants to do. And you want to see yourself be able to love people the way God's called us to love people. You want to be able to handle relationships the way that God has called us to handle relationships. I've found that attitudes of the heart are vitally important to keeping it pliable for God to move in our lives and through our lives, flowing through our relationships. In fact, the word attitude, as defined by the Merriam-Webster dictionary, is simply this. It's an internal position or feeling with regard to something else. Some of you are like, obviously, that's what attitude is, for sure. But here are some other words often used as synonyms, and I love this because it helps us identify what an attitude could look like within a relationship. You ready for this? It's disposition, feeling, mood, come on somebody, mood, opinion, temper, tone, perspective, frame of mind, outlook, or view. When you talk about some of those ones in the middle, feeling, disposition, mood, you can see where our attitude can really come into play in relationships. And we're going to talk about that in just a moment. But in Ephesians chapter 4, verse 22, and I want you to just jot that passage down. Ephesians 4:22, it tells us this. It says, you were taught with regard to your former way of life to put off your old self, which is being corrupted by its deceitful desires, to be made new in the attitude of your minds. How many of you know that the attitude of your heart, it starts with renewing the attitude of your mind? How many of you know that everything that comes into the heart comes a lot of times through the mind? We talked about last week how like you have to guard your ears and guard your eyes because it feeds the mind, and what feeds the mind goes into the heart. It's the same way with our attitudes. Whatever attitudes we're feeding the most, whatever feelings we're feeding the most become our strongest desires, and it's out of our strongest desires that we make every decision that we make. And so we've got to push off or put off those former desires and start to renew our minds so that we have godly attitudes. in our heart, and we have godly desires, and we start to live in accordance and be doers of the word. How many of you know that that's vitally important? To make sure that we get this at mind level so that it stays pure at heart level, and it's so vitally important. So I have a few things tonight that I just wanted to share with you. 3 points really, on how to have successful relationships. This can be a friendship. This can apply to a dating relationship. And can I just encourage you in here, if you're not in a dating relationship right now, good for you. And I'm kidding. If you're in one, don't take that offensively. But if you're not, you have an opportunity to practice this in every relationship that you have. In your relationship with your parents, hello somebody, in your relationship with your friends, you can practice this in your current relationships and build habits that will help you in your dating relationships. The first thing is simply this: speak up, don't act out. Speak up, don't act out. Something that I've noticed when it comes to relationships is communication is absolutely key. Have you ever noticed this? Communication is so vital, but so often, we said last week that unrealistic expectations are one of the leading causes of divorce. In fact, the second leading cause of divorce in our nation is unrealistic expectations. And right alongside that is unmet expectations. But I wonder how many expectations are unmet because they're not communicated. And for me, I remember when Jillian and I were dating, I remember being the guy who wasn't really great at communicating. You know what I mean? I wasn't really great at sharing my feelings. Saying hey, this is what I'm feeling, and I'd like to talk about this. She had no problem telling me exactly what was on her mind and what needed to change. She's more assertive than I am. But naturally, I'm more reserved. And naturally, I won't say anything. I'll just shrink back from it a little bit and just deal with it. And here's the problem with that. A lot of times when we fail to communicate, when we fail to speak up, we end up acting out. Why? Because we hold everything in that's happened, right? And then all of a sudden we've held it in, and another thing happens, and another thing happens, and another thing happens. And then all of a sudden, you blow up. And it might not look like yelling. It might just look like a mood. It might not look like screaming at somebody, but it might just look like your body language. You know what I mean? And so how many of you know what I'm talking about? You can hold something in and keep something in and keep repressing it and repressing it and repressing it, holding it in. And all of a sudden, instead of speaking up and dealing with it right away, dealing with it quickly by speaking up, you act out, whether through a mood, whether through body language, whatever it is. This is not a good way to communicate in any relationship, and it's not a good way to have conflict resolution. Since then, we've learned, we have sit downs and we talk about stuff, and it's revolutionary for our relationship. It is great. And can I encourage you in any relationship, whether it's a friendship, regardless of what it is, learn to communicate well your feelings so that your feelings don't end up getting bottled up and then exploding. It's like when you shake up a bottle of pop, and then you take the lid off, it just explodes. That's how your emotions can be if you're not good at expressing them. See, never hold them in, express them so that you can actually have good conversation and good conflict resolution. So here's what not to do. Here's something that I've noticed that can take place, especially within a dating relationship. Some of you might be guilty of this in here. If you are, look straight ahead. I have no idea what your relationship is like. So I'm talking just talking to somebody tonight. May not be you. Silent treatment. We get upset, and all of a sudden, not only are we not speaking up, but we're silent. We don't want to let them hear what's wrong. We want them to feel what's wrong. You know what I mean? I want you to feel my fury. You will feel it. And so we have an angry look on our face. Our body language changes. Remember what we were talking about with attitude? Mood, disposition. So we look like this, and we're slouched now. We were just and now we're and you were now you're you know what I mean? And you're all moody, and you're angry, and you're not gonna say anything. You're just gonna let them see it. all over you. And they have no idea how to fix it because all they can do is feel it, you know? And if we're honest, we've all probably been guilty of that at one time or another. This never resolves any conflict within a relationship. It only adds to the conflict because the person that is on the other side of the fury, they can just feel it. They have no idea how to fix it. And they're looking like, I wish I knew, but unfortunately, I'm not a mind reader. And for whatever reason, the Holy Spirit isn't letting me know right now. So I need you to let me know. And some of you are like, oh, the Holy Spirit should always let you know. I'm sorry if you eat manna for breakfast and the rest of us don't, okay? The rest of us who are normal, we need communication from people. And so here's another way, though. All joking aside, here's another way how not to speak up. Ladies, he asks, what's wrong? I'm fine. Is everything, I'm fine. Can I do it? I'm fine. Did I do so? I said I'm fine. Stop asking me. And I don't know, guys, if you've noticed this, but when she says I'm fine, it means that she's anything but fine. I mean, she might still look good, but she is anything but inwardly fine. You know what I mean? And so sometimes you're sitting on the other side of that like, what is one supposed to do? I have no idea. That's why I believe that God made us able to communicate with each other and be able to talk things out and be able to resolve conflict the right way, which is actually opening your mouth. I have a 5-year-old and a 2-year-old. So this is just the season that I'm in. We watch Daniel Tiger. Anybody know what that is? Anybody babysit? Daniel Tiger's Neighborhood. Thank you, Ryan. That's great. So I love that they have a song where Daniel starts throwing fits and his mood and his disposition changes. And he starts going like, and he starts making the grunt noise. And they have a song like, use your words. The whole song is predicated on use your words. Use your words to show how you feel. You know what I mean? It's like a great song, great song. And isn't it interesting that the same thing that they're trying to teach my 5-year-old and my 2-year-old applies to all of us in here tonight? That if we're not careful, we will start to show it all over our body language. We will start to exude anger, fury, let other people feel it, say, I'm fine. But the key to communication within any relationship is to communicate the right way. The second thing tonight is simply this. Respond calmly. Don't react sharply. Respond calmly. Don't react sharply. And this is huge for when you are communicating and when you are resolving conflict. It's so easy to, in the heat of the moment, say things that you don't mean. And it's so easy to, in the heat of the moment, react a certain way with anger and fury rather than responding calmly. And I found that never is helpful when you react, but it is helpful when you respond. The Bible says it this way, a soft answer turns away wrath. I believe that we're called to live that way. I believe that that's the way that God's called us to live in relationship with each other. One of the things that we teach in premarital, I have the privilege of walking people through premarital sessions, and one of the things that we teach is make sure that you never say statements like, you always, or things like that. You always do fill in the blank. You're always acting like fill in the blank. But you reverse it and you say, I'm just feeling like this is going on, and I just wanted to make you make it you, not them. Because what you do the second that you say, you always, what do? They're instantly gonna get defensive and they're instantly going to react. So you're setting them up to fail in some ways. So I don't know about you, but in relationships that I'm in, I don't want to set people up to fail. I want to have healthy relationships the way that God intended it. So I'm going to make sure that I respond calmly. Some of you, for you might have a temper in here. You might need to walk away for a minute. Think about it. Take a deep breath. Maybe even come back to it the next day. Whatever you have to do, just make sure that you make it where you can respond calmly and you're not reacting sharply. Because I believe that one of the most cutting things you can do in any relationship is respond sharply with a sharp tone of voice. Notice attitude, one of the definitions was tone, or one of the synonymous words was tone. Your tone matters. In relationships, never underestimate your tone. And I've noticed this even with having kids. Like, my tone can either let Jude know when I'm disciplining him that I'm for him and I want to help him do better, or it can make him cry really easily. He's an emotional kid. So I've noticed if I'm like, Jude, what are you doing? Then he'll like instantly, his lip starts to quiver. And so I've learned to be like, hey, buddy, let's not do that, okay? You know, why? Because a soft answer, it turns away wrath. Why? Because it's always better to respond lovingly than to react out of anger. And so I just want to encourage you in your relationships, and I'd ask you to evaluate your relationships. How can you better respond rather than react in your current relationships? Because if you're doing this in your current relationships, it's going to be a lot easier to do in your future relationships while dating and married and you have kids and all of those things. And the third thing is simply this: forgive quickly, don't be offended easily. Forgive quickly, don't be offended easily. I had Devin pour me a cup of Gatorade because I'm thirsty. And just kidding. It's up here as a prop. It's a prop that got here about 15 minutes late. It's okay. But Luke 17:1, and you can jot this down. It says, then he said, Jesus, to his disciples, it's impossible, but that offenses should come. But woe to him through whom they come. So what is Jesus telling us? You're going to have the opportunity to feel offended. But even though we all, maybe even multiple times per day, we all have the opportunity to feel offended, you have a choice of whether you're going to be offended. We all have opportunities every single day, I want to repeat that, to feel offended, but we all have a decision that we can make. We can choose not to be offended. There's actually a quote that I love that offense or bitterness is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. See, we all have a chance to take in, if you will, offense. We all have the opportunity to drink the poison. But I think it's time for us in our relationships to realize that it's just not worth it. Because when we do that, it's like we're drinking poison, expecting the other person to die. We're really hurting ourselves. We're really only putting something toxic in our own hearts. And it's creating a hardness and an attitude in our hearts that keep us held back from all that God has, that keeps us held back from God's best, that keeps us from loving people the way that God's called us to love people. I found that offense can come through multiple means. It can come through scenarios that you dream up, that we imagine, that nothing actually happened, but our mind just went crazy. We just created a scenario in our own minds. Offense can happen through the little everyday things. And think about it, within dating relationships, you said hi to them before you said hi to me. You know, and I'm not making fun of that. I know that the struggle is real. You didn't call me. You said you were going to call. It's like, are we that dependent? Like, do we need all that? You know what I'm saying? I'm trying to be loving tonight, and please understand my heart. I love each and every one of you, but sometimes when we put these expectations on people, sometimes that are uncommunicated, and then we allow every little thing to just dig under our skin and every little thing to bother us and every little thing to offend us. We live in a culture today where it is popular to be offended. Where our culture today tells you should be offended and you should let everybody know about it. But we serve a God who told us that we should not be offended, that we should avoid drinking the poison. So maybe it's something that you painted as a scenario in your own mind. Maybe it's something that a bunch of small things that they did. Or I want to speak to a group of people tonight who maybe something real, like something big, like not just small petty stuff, because we know the difference, right? I'm not gonna go into too many scenarios because I know you've got testing and I wanna get you out on time. I'll trust that you can identify some of the petty things that you've allowed yourself to get hurt and offended over. But sometimes there's the real thing. There's like the big thing. The thing that really does like cause a wound, that you really are hurt, that you really have been offended. You've had that opportunity to take that offense and carry it as your own. You've had the opportunity to drink the offense, to take it in. And I just want to challenge you tonight that you have an opportunity to set yourself free. You have an opportunity to not go ahead and let this in you, because what happens to you can only affect you if you let it in you. If you let it in you. And I believe that tonight, under the sound of my voice, we serve a God who, like we talked about last week, he's near to the brokenhearted. He binds up their wounds, that he can bind up your wounds, that he can heal your heart. But you have to make a conscious decision and a conscious choice. I'm not gonna be offended. We all have a chance to feel offended, but we choose whether to be offended. And you have to make a choice. I'm gonna be offense-proof. I'm not gonna allow myself under any circumstance to ever be offended. The Bible tells us in the last days, many will be offended and their love will wax cold. They won't be able to love the way that God's called them to love, both people and God. Why? Because they allowed something in them that was something that happened to them. I believe tonight God's calling us to not let that be us, to stand our guard, to stay alert, to be wise to the devices of the enemy, to the things that he's trying to do. And even though we're tempted with everything in us, even though it seems like we'd be justified, we have every right to be offended, we choose not to, and we choose to set ourselves free by forgiving. And we say, you know what? It's tempting, but no thanks. The Bible says no temptation has come to you that isn't common to mankind. And God is faithful. He'll never allow you to be tempted above your ability to endure or to overcome the temptation. I believe that we all have the temptation of offense, but I believe that we all can say, no, I'm not gonna drink from the cup of offense. I'm not gonna let what happened to me in me, because I wanna love like Jesus said I can love, and I wanna experience relationships like Jesus said that I can experience relationships, and I'm going after God's best in my life. I love this quote by Martin Luther King Jr., and I'll close with this. It says, forgiveness is not an occasional act. It's the constant attitude. The attitude of our hearts, it matters. The soil of our hearts, it matters. And I believe that God's calling us tonight to resist offense, to speak up, not act out, to make sure that we go ahead and respond calmly and we don't react sharply, and to go ahead and forgive quickly so that we can remain free. Our soil remains soft. We can be conduits, if you will. We can be vessels, if you will. We can be carriers, if you will, of the love of God to both our friendships and our dating relationships. And we can experience what God originally intended, which is healthy, life-giving, not toxic, not dysfunctional, but healthy, life-giving relationships. How many of you want that to be your life? I don't know about you, but I want to make a commitment tonight. I'm not going to allow what happened to me to affect what's going on in me. I'm going to keep my heart soft. I'm going to guard my heart above everything else.